Thank you so much. It's really great to be here today speaking to you. So I'm going to start with a brief overview of the publishing process for journals, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about publishing open access with Cambridge University Press, and then I'll hand over to Andrew. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first step, writing your manuscript, you've finished all those important scientific experiments and you're ready to write it up to submit to a journal. So it's very important to remember what we call the ABC of effective writing: accuracy, brevity, and clarity. So in terms of accuracy, you'll need to clearly present your research, and your article should only be submitted when it's fully complete. We suggest reading the information in the manuscript submission guidelines and ensuring your paper is presented according to journal requirements, as these do change from journal to journal. In terms of brevity, when writing, it's a good idea to keep it simple and really get to the point quickly. A long manuscript may not necessarily be better, as it may lose your reader's attention. For clarity, your paper will need to be well organised and clear to allow editors and peer reviewers to understand the paper well enough to evaluate the research within it. It's important that you have a clear message to show and to show how that the research is really important to your target audience. Next slide, please. So when thinking about which journal to submit to, you'll no doubt have usual journals that you use yourself and you read frequently. It's important to talk to your network, think about the audience that you're trying to reach. There are some journal selector tools that you can use to help you do this, which are you put information in and they will suggest some journals that you could choose. You want to think specifically about the audience and how that fits with your article. For example, do you want to publish open access in a gold open access journal, which I'll talk about a bit later on? Or does your work suit a journal with a really broad scope that you want to reach across different disciplines, or maybe something a bit more specialised within your own field? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, as I said, journals typically have their own submission guidelines, which cover the format to submit your paper in and also what is required. It's really worth reading these through and making sure you have all the information in your submission, because if you don't, the manuscript may be sent back to you and the peer review may be delayed. And this can cover things like how to prepare your figures, what to include, such as cover letters, funder information, declaration of interests, and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the title of your manuscript is really important, as they capture the attention of the editors and peer reviewers. It's important to keep it short and meaningful, and there is actually some research to indicate that a shorter title receives more citations, probably because it's easier to find. Also include with your submission 1 or 2 keywords, because once published, this will help more readers find your article through search engines such as Google. We've put an example there of where the first title in the top box is quite wordy, and you can actually just trim it down and make it more punchy and more interesting. Next slide, please. So all papers typically have an abstract, and these are visible to everyone, whether or not readers have subscriptions or not. So they should be clear and informative and really cover the main points of your paper. Again, it's worth checking your journal guidelines, because some journals will put limits on the number of words within abstracts. Think again about making it compatible for search engines. And in terms of discoverability, it's likely that readers will search for terms that are commonly used in your field. So try and include effective keywords. Usually there's an option to submit some keywords, but also include them within your abstract as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Although the basis of peer review is the same across all journals, so it's experts within a field providing comments on a manuscript submitted to the journal, There are different types of peer review, and I've listed here some of the most common types. So single blind peer review is probably the most common, certainly within scientific research. So that's where reviewers are aware of the author's identities, but the authors are never informed of the reviewer's identity. Double-blind peer review, this is very common amongst social sciences and humanities, and that's where neither the author nor the reviewer is aware of each other's identities. And also open peer review, where authors and reviewers are both aware of the other's identities. And in this case, in some journals, the reviewer's reports are published alongside the article, so readers can view the reviewer's reports as well as the article itself. There also are some models around post-publication peer review. So this is in particular experimental open access publishers. Often the manuscript is posted before it's peer reviewed, and then people comment on it, and the reviews are often posted alongside the paper again. The type of peer review used by a journal is usually clearly stated within the policy pages on the journal website. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the assessment process for journal articles. So once you've finished your article, you've submitted it to your journal. The journal editor will then initially screen the article to decide whether it's suitable for the journal and should progress on to peer review. Sometimes at this stage, an article could be rejected, and that's called desk rejection. And that will usually be because it's out of scope for the journal or a reason like that. If it is successful, then the article will move on to be peer reviewed, and the editor will select some reviewers to provide comments on the manuscript. They'll then assess the reviews that are provided. At this stage, the article could be accepted, rejected, or most commonly sent back to author for revisions. Next slide, please. So when looking at the possible outcomes of the peer review, it's really unusual that a paper would just be published straight away without any changes at all. If it's not rejected at that stage, it's usually revisions are nearly always asked for. So they could be minor, such as language editing or adding in some references, or they could be more major, such as even additional experiments required. Next slide, please. As the author, the comments of the referees give you an opportunity to refine and improve the manuscript, and also to discuss the comments that you don't agree with, and that's perfectly fine to do. In writing your response, we suggest providing a cover letter which summarises the main changes that you've made, and also then a more detailed response line by line to the reviewer's comments, providing details of what you changed or why you didn't make any of the changes requested, if that's what happened. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to move on to an overview of open access now. Next slide, please. So open access publishing is becoming increasingly important in academic research dissemination. In 2020, 36% of articles were published open access, and that is a 16% yearly growth since 2017. A lot of that increase has actually been driven by the COVID pandemic and a drive to make more research widely available. It's compared to a 1% growth over the same time period for non-open access articles. And it's predicted that by the end of next year, around 40%, 47%, so nearly half of all content will be published open access. Next slide, please. So this table shows you some of the different types of open access journals. Diamond open access journals, these are typically funded by a society, an institution, or a funder. So there's no author payment required, but the content is still freely available for everyone to read. Fully gold open access journals, so authors are usually required to pay an article processing charge or an APC, either individually or through their funder or institutional agreements. And then all the content then is freely available for readers. Hybrid journals have a mixture of subscription and open access content, with only the open access articles having an article processing charge. The open access content is then available for everyone to read, but the subscription content is usually behind a paywall, so people need to subscribe to read. There are journals which are non-open access or subscription journals, and there they have no open access content, so there are no APCs charged, but all the content is behind the paywall, so people need to pay a subscription to read the journal. Importantly, you'll notice that each of these journals has the peer review content column ticked. So regardless of the journal model, peer review is an integral part of each of them, and the standard and quality of peer review should not vary regardless of the journal's OA status. Next slide, please. At Cambridge University Press, we now have 70 fully gold or diamond open access journals, along with 359 hybrid journals, which allow open access article publishing on an individual article basis within a subscription model. There are very few journals in our portfolio now that don't allow open access publishing in some form. We're also encouraging our hybrid journals to apply for transformative journal status as a route to compliance with Plan S. And we now have over 200 journals with such status. And this means that these journals are committed to the goal of transitioning to fully open access by gradually increasing their open access content. As we do this, we'll continue to reduce subscription prices for these journals as we have a double dipping policy and the amount of non-open access content falls. The bar chart there shows the proportion of open access articles within our journals. And as you can see, this has been increasing each year. And based on author patterns from the last few years, we estimate that about half of our research authors will choose open access this year. Next slide, please. This slide shows just a small selection of our fully gold open access journals, which you can see span a number of subject areas in the health and human sciences, microbiology, agriculture, engineering, environmental science, even history. The understanding of open access is growing in all communities, and funding pathways can be transferred from the so-called author pays APC model, the article processing charge model, to a library pays read and publish or transformative agreement model. And new disciplines can now enjoy significant benefits that open access can bring to their publications. Some of these journals were launched gold open access right from the beginning, and some of them have been converted from the subscription model when it became clear that there was enough community, library, or funder support to make the change. Next slide, please. So publishing open access typically incurs an article processing charge, an APC, and this charge is usually paid by the author's funding body, or the author's institution. So increasingly, we're making agreements with institutions called transformative agreements, and you may have heard the term read and publish, and read and publish is a type of transformative agreement. So this means that authors at these institutions can publish open access in our journals without paying an APC, and readers can still access the subscription content that we publish. Importantly, full waivers or APC discounts are available in both gold open access and hybrid journals within our portfolio. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit more about our transformative agreements later. If you're not based at an institution that has a transformative agreement with us, we may have a discretionary waiver available for gold open access journals so that authors without access to funding can still publish in the journals. And these waivers and discounts don't apply to our hybrid journals because any author who's unable to pay an APC could still publish in those journals through the subscription route. Our ultimate goal in the transition to open access is to ensure that no one is prevented from publishing in our journals, no matter what the publication model. Next slide, please. So publishing in a gold open access journal, a journal that's entirely open access, is very straightforward. When publishing open access within a hybrid journal, the author has a choice to make. So the process is much the same as traditional publishing. All articles still go through the same peer review process and are then accepted or rejected by the editor. The key point for deciding on open access publication in Cambridge hybrid journals is when the article is accepted, and then you'll be asked to complete an author publishing agreement, which we call a license to publish, and select to publish open access at that stage under a Creative Commons license. So that's a CC, and then there are various licenses within the Creative Commons family. Next slide, please. This is just a brief aside from open access. I wanted to include some information here to help prospective authors to prepare submissions. So we offer a range of manuscript preparation services, and we deliver that in partnership with American journal experts. So services for authors include language editing, translation of your manuscript by experts who know your language and your field, referencing and full manuscript formatting to help authors save time, presenting visually appealing figures and illustrations to represent data. There's a journal recommendation tool to determine the best journal to meet your publishing goals, and also sort of video communications to reach a broad audience to disseminate your research. So that's the end of my section. I'm now going to pass over to Andrew, who will talk some more about the benefits and the myths of open access publishing.
Thanks, Liz, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm delighted to take part in this session. So I'd like to start with a few slides that explore the question, do authors gain an advantage by publishing their articles under a gold open access model? And then I'll move on to talk through some of the common myths and misunderstandings that we hear a lot from our authors and customers around open access. So next slide, please. Open access content is freely available online, not restricted by the paywall that's in place for subscription content, which means increased discoverability, usage, and the potential for higher citations for your work. And open access articles receive on average 3 to 5 times more article downloads than non-open access articles. And they also receive 30 to 50% more citations than their subscription alternatives, benefiting from the wider reach of being freely available online so that anyone anywhere can find, read, reuse, and benefit from your research. Next slide, please. So to look in a little more detail at the download advantage for open access. Open access articles receive higher downloads in our own journal's portfolio. And we can see here that open access articles are on average receiving 5 times the usage of subscription articles within their first year of publication. So the chart here summarizes article downloads received during the first 12 months from publication of the 20,000 research articles which we published in 2020 across all of the disciplines that we publish in. The words are quite small at the bottom, but it ranges from mathematics to art, from music to politics, life sciences. But if we were to zoom in and look at the individual disciplines, we see variation across subjects, but nevertheless a substantial usage advantage for open access articles across every discipline that we publish in. For each subject, the yellow bar here represents the mean usage of open access articles, and the blue bar shows the same figure for articles published non-open access behind a paywall. The difference between the two bars shows the extent to which OA articles are outperforming non-open access articles. There is much more that could be said here about how different subject areas perform differently, but really the headline that I wanted to communicate today is that this usage advantage we see replicated across our portfolio with no particular distinction between our humanities and social sciences subjects or our STM subject areas. Next slide, please. You can also see by looking at our data that there is evidence for a citation advantage across the range of subjects we publish. Again, the yellow bar shows mean citations achieved by articles published open access. The blue bar shows the same figure for articles published non-open access. And the evidence is strong for a citation advantage in a number of subjects, particularly medicine, psychology, earth and environmental sciences. And in the social sciences, the strongest indication of advantage is in political science. But in most subjects, we're seeing a small advantage for open access articles. We also have a range of data on non-academic citation activity. So mentions on social media, references in the news media or on blogs, or references in policy papers. Thanks to data from Altmetric, we can also say that open access articles received on average 82% more social media mentions. They were 200% more likely to end up referenced in a news article or on a blog, and they were 9% more likely to be mentioned in a policy paper. So I think that demonstrates the increased reach both within the fields that we're publishing and outside, having impact outside in the wider world. Next slide, please. So all of this evidence comes together to shows that there really does appear to be a very clear open access advantage. It applies across disciplines in the humanities and social sciences as much as in STM fields. The gains, especially in usage, are not marginal but substantial in scale, and importantly prolonged over time. There is evidence too that increased usage is translating into real material gains to scholarship. More citation, more debate, more discussion, more policy impact, and more public impact on broader audiences. So as we at the press set our open access strategy, this kind of evidence for an open access advantage for our authors really helps to steer us towards an open future. The data clearly shows that open access genuinely improves access to research and does so in a way that potentially increases its impact. And we exist to deliver exactly these things for our authors. And so this is a really key incentive for us to prioritize the sustainable move of our business to an open access publishing model. Next slide, please. So I wanted to dig in here into some of the common myths that exist around open access around the world and across many disciplines. So as we've seen, open access brings many benefits to authors, readers, funders of academic research, and removing the barrier to access of a subscription paywall really opens up important research findings far beyond the sometimes siloed parameters of the academy. And it allows access to anyone in the world with an internet connection. But this is a new and quickly changing way of publishing that is fundamentally changing a model that's been in place and serving the academic community for decades, if not centuries. In some disciplines, often those that have funding from organizations who have a strong mandate for open access, the model is widely adopted, and many of our authors are passionate advocates for open access. But in other disciplines, where the funding has been less forthcoming or funding bodies are less focused on open access, the pace of adoption has been slower. And to many authors in these areas, the benefits of open access and the routes to funding they may take are a lot less clear. And as Liz has said, we firmly believe that the benefits of open access should be open to all researchers. And we see it as a key part of our role and our mission to work with institutions and funders to educate our authors and make the process of publishing open access as streamlined and as transparent as possible. So to focus on the myths. The first myth we often hear, there's no benefit to me. Many authors fail to see the immediate benefits to them of publishing their research open access. They often feel that it's actually more of an administrative burden that's imposed on them by their funders or by their university than a model that can bring real advantages and benefits to their work. So we've seen in our own data that the huge increase in usage that open access content gets, roughly 3 to 5 times higher on average than their non-open access equivalents. And as we've seen, there is evidence too that this strong usage is also leading to increased dissemination and impacts. We see that evidence of positive citation in our own data, And there is lots of evidence from studies around the industry that show the same. And we also see similarly positive signs in the less traditional measures of impact: social media mentions, news media mentions, and policy paper mentions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is quite a big issue for many of our authors. And it's that somehow open access means that the work is of low quality, or the journal is of low quality. And it is true that with the rise of open access, there has been a corresponding rise in instances of predatory journal publishing, an exploitative business model in which fake journals charge authors a fee for publication with no intention of providing the expected services that Liz has been through, such as editorial guidance or peer review, in return. But for ourselves and for the vast majority of our reputable competitors, the quality of the content that we publish remains of the highest importance to our long-term and sustainable future. It's absolutely crucial to us that our editorial processes and the rigor behind them remain at the heart of everything that we publish. So all content that is submitted to us for publication under an open access model goes through the exact same process of peer review and editorial board scrutiny, advice, and acceptance criteria that our traditional and subscription-based content has always gone through. We draw no distinction between the two content types, and the business model of open access, the payment of an article, a processing charge, an APC, is kept completely separate from the editorial processes and plays no part whatsoever in the decisions that our editors take about the validity or otherwise of research. Next slide, please. The third and final myth that we hear a lot from our authors is that open access is just too expensive. They don't have the funding. As I mentioned earlier, many of our authors are in some of the less well-funded disciplines, particularly areas of the humanities and social sciences, where significant research grants from large charitable foundations are just not available. And they feel that the biggest barrier to their going open access is a financial one. A recent survey of our authors from across all of the disciplines we publish in showed that 76% of respondents strongly agreed with the statement that open access publishing is progressive and should be encouraged. However, from the same cohort, 54% agreed with the statement that OA is too expensive. So our authors see the value in the concept of open access, but often cannot see beyond a perceived financial barrier. And that's why it's a key priority for us to find new business models that all of the authors we work with can use to publish their articles open access. But we offer some options for APCs to be waived, particularly for papers by authors based in lower income countries. We partner with an organization called Research for Life, which is dedicated to providing access to academic content and services in parts of the world where finance is a real barrier. And there we either waive completely or significantly discount our other processing charges. Next slide, please. Thanks. But our biggest priority by far is to work with our long-standing institutional customers, the university libraries, who have always provided access to journal content through the payment of subscriptions, to put in place agreements which allow faculty unlimited options to publish open access in a broad range of our journals, so-called read and publish deals or transformative agreements. And you can see here we have transformative agreements now covering more than 2,300 institutions in 50 countries all around the world, from Europe and the Americas to Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Our strategy is to convert as many of our traditional subscription-based customers to this model as possible, as quickly as possible. So if you are based in an institution that has such a deal with us, you have the opportunity to publish your work open access in almost any of our journals without having to pay an APC. We've worked with your institutions on an agreement that repurposes some of the money that they have previously spent with us on subscriptions to fund the APCs for authors in that institution. So from the perspective of you, the author, this is open access publishing free of any financial barrier. Next slide, please. So you may or you may not be aware that we have such a deal in place with 49 institutions in South Korea. So that means that it's possible that any of you from these universities might be able to publish your article with us without being charged a fee. The APC costs for open access publishing have been met centrally, negotiated by your universities with us. And I would encourage any of you interested in publishing your work under the open access model to find out more and to take up this opportunity. You can publish your work in over 400 of our journals and benefit yourself from that increased usage and dissemination. Next slide, please. And I wanted to finish by showing that actually some of your colleagues are already benefiting from this deal. We've included some examples here of recently published articles from South Korean scholars that have been able to go open access because of the deal we have in place with their institution. And you can see these are articles in a range of disciplines, from fluid mechanics to political science, from psychology to linguistics. So we hope you found this to be a useful and an engaging session, and we'd love to hand over now to any questions any of you may have. Thank you.
So I can take the first question that we have, although I'm not sure I'm going to be able to provide a particularly satisfactory response. So it's around how long does it take for journals to evaluate manuscripts from submission to acceptance? And this does vary quite a lot between journals, and even it varies a lot between papers submitted to the same journal. Mostly research journals don't tend to publicize the times it can take to evaluate manuscripts. But certainly if it's a desk-based rejection, that should happen relatively soon after submission, within a week. And although that might, or obviously isn't, the desired outcome from the author, at least it is a quick response and means that the author can then consider their manuscript for submission to a different journal. In terms of going through the peer review process, this would typically take a few weeks. For most scientific journals, it can take longer. For certainly the humanities and social sciences journals tend to take a bit longer. So typically, probably within a couple of months for scientific journals, you would expect to have a decision on your papers. Andrew, I'll pass the second question over to you, shall I, about publicising transformative agreements.
Thanks, Liz. So this is from a librarian. It's been only 5 months since we had open access TA deal with our university, so it's in the early stages. Yep, and they haven't yet had inquiries from researchers. Could we tell if there are any good ways of promoting this? Yeah, in the library more effectively. I think there's probably a couple of things to point out. One, many of our TA customers find that they have to promote the deal quite actively in their institutions. And that's particularly true when they're in a country that doesn't have any sort of top-down mandate for authors to go open access. So for example, in the Netherlands, in Europe, there is a governmental mandate that all Dutch authors have to publish OA. But in, for example, the United States, such a mandate doesn't exist. So our librarian partners in the United States, excuse me, have to work a little harder to get their authors to obtain the deal. And we've seen all sorts of things, from sort of promotion in faculty newsletters, for on-site workshops for authors to drop into. So I think really it's about using any channels that you already have to reach your faculty and getting the message out there that they can publish open access. But we also have on Cambridge Core, we have a set of resources that librarians can use to help them market their deal. I will just put the URL into the chat. That's a sort of general page about open access for librarians. And there is a section in there for those people that have already a Transform to agreement, with a link to some suitable promotional ideas and resources. So do please take a look at that, and do get back to us if there's anything more you'd like us to do to help you with that.
So we have a question about how we recommend journals to authors. So you can find a list of all our journals on our website on Cambridge Core, and you can search by subject area as well on Cambridge Core. I did mention in my section that we partner with American Journal Experts, and they have a journal recommendation tool. So I'm just going to pop that URL in the chat as well. And that's a general link to author services. So that includes the manuscript formatting and all those services provided by AGE. We've had a question about, are there any differences in open access performance for special issues? And are there any different OA fees for special issues? So in terms of performance, I think that would be something quite interesting to look into. I don't actually know off the top of my head. Andrew might have more information.
I think special issues quite often generate more usage than a sort of standard issue anyway, because they're a curated collection of content. And I don't think that's any different really in an open access model than in a subscription model. I suppose the difference is that open access content gets more usage anyway, so it's an extra boost on top of that. But no, we don't see a marked difference there. We've got a question here around quality, actually.
Absolutely, and sorry, there was just a second part to that question in terms of fees for special issues, which I was going to mention. Some special issues may have the open access fees waived if they're covered by, for example, a conference organizer. We have some examples of that. However, if you're an institution with a transformative agreement, you would be covered anyway, even if there was an APC payment to pay. Sorry, Andrew, you go ahead.
I was just jumping ahead to the next question, actually. Are we finished on the special issue question? I think we are. I think maybe Liz.
I think so.
Liz, either you or I have got quite bad reception. So if it's me, let me know. So yeah, the next question was around quality. This is from a person who's seen journals from well-known publishers and has seen a downturn in the quality of papers that have been published after that journal has gone open access. It is a big challenge to balance the open science concept and financial purposes, you know, the need to make money out of that model. And they would like to hear our opinion about this point. I think I would just start by reiterating what I said at the beginning, in my slides, which is that we are very careful to make no distinction editorially between content, whether it's open access or not. All of our journals, the editorial teams behind all of our journals who make the decisions about what is good science or not, are independent practicing academics. They're not press employees. Some of our competitors do employ in-house editors to commission content. We don't. All of our editors are practicing academics, experts in their field. And we've always relied on those people to steer us on the best decisions and the best papers to accept. And that's the same in an open access world as it is in a subscription world. Those editors don't know in the case of a hybrid journal, whether an article will be open access or not. So don't know if there's a financial reason for them to accept a paper. Anything else you'd want to say on that, Liz? Oh, I think we may have lost Liz. I think she might have frozen.
No, I would agree, and also just within. Oh dear.
And I think we got one more questions from the Jonggap Kim, and he also asked about, we mentioned that we cover more than 400 journals. So does it mean that you publish all those journals? Could you answer that about the questions?
Yeah, we publish about 440 journals across our whole portfolio. And as Liz mentioned in her section, the vast majority of those, I don't know the exact figure, but I'm going to say about 80% at least of those accept open access articles. So they're either gold open access journals, which means they only publish open access, or they're hybrid journals, which means they publish a mix of open access and subscription content. The small proportion of journals that don't publish open access are largely in the areas of the humanities where there isn't so much funding, perhaps an area like classics or literature. But even so, we're working with all of our journals so that ultimately all of them do accept open access. And that's sort of an ongoing piece of work.